This part 1 video discusses what God will have to do to make America, British Commonwealth nations, and the Jewish state of Israel know that He is the Lord. It specifically answers the question whether our people know God. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. On August 6, 2022, my local church pastor, Mr. Doug Wendt, gave a sermon titled Ezekiel's Warning to the United States, in which he pointed out that God used the phrase, "Then they will know that I am the Lord," in the book of Ezekiel more than 60 times, prophesying how he will make Israel, primarily America, British Commonwealth nations, and the Jewish state of Israel know that he is the Lord. I immediately realized how important it was for me to address that subject in my videos. In this part 1 video, I discuss why it is a life and death issue for me to address that subject. Though the words are my own, I have taken some ideas and themes from Mr. Wendt's sermon and added much information of my own to address this warning to our nations. I have addressed Ezekiel's prophecies in the past, but these videos address them in greater detail. Even though on my YouTube and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, I discuss a variety of subjects on religion, the Bible, current world affairs, Bible prophecy, global business and tax issues, abortion and other issues, I must always stay focused on the commission given to God's church and hence to me also for the end time. This commission for the end of the end time, which we are now in, is stated in Revelation 10 verse 11. And he said to me, "You must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings." Thus, my most important job is to explain prophecies about many peoples, nations, and kings in languages of the world. In explaining prophecies about peoples, nations, and kings, primary focus must be on prophecies concerning the American, British, and Jewish people. That focus is mentioned by the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 3 verses 4 to 7 and 17 to 22. Then he said to me, "Son of man, go to the house of Israel," which is primarily America, British Commonwealth nations, "and speak with my words to them. But the house of Israel will not listen to you, because they will not listen to me. For all the house of Israel are impudent and hard-hearted." Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, "Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. Therefore hear a word from my mouth, and give them warning from me. When I say to the wicked, 'You shall surely die,' and you give him no warning, nor speak to warn the wicked from his wicked way, to save his life, that same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at your hand. Yet if you warn the wicked, and he does not turn from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul. Again, when a righteous man turns from his righteousness and commits iniquity, and I lay a stumbling block before him, he shall die. Because you did not give him warning, he shall die in his sin, and his righteousness which he has done shall not be remembered, but his blood I will require at your hand. Nevertheless, if you warn the righteous man that the righteous should not sin, and he does not sin, he shall surely live, because he took warning. Also, you have delivered your soul." So a watchman's job is to scan the horizon for danger and warn his people. God in his prophecies has identified the dangers faced by his people Israel, meaning America, British Commonwealth nations, and the Jews, and my primary job is to warn them. If I fail to do so, I will lose my physical and eternal life. Hence, addressing this subject is a life and death issue for me. In verse 7, God has already warned us that Americans, Britons, and the Jews will not listen to our warning, because they are an impudent people, meaning they are cocky and insolent people. In Ezekiel 33 verses 31 to 33, God further describes the Israelites' reaction to our warnings. "So they come to you as people do, they sit before you as my people, and they hear your words, but they do not do them. For with their mouth they show much love, but their hearts pursue their own gain or covetousness. Indeed, you are to them as a very lovely song of one who has a pleasant voice and can play well on an instrument. For they hear your words, but they do not do them. And when this comes to pass, surely it will come, then they will know that a prophet has been among them. God thus warns us in God's church that knowing the nature of the Americans, Britons, and the Jews, He guarantees that they will show much love after hearing our words, but will not obey to change their ways. They will remain too busy with their material pursuits. Almost every year at the time of Christmas and Easter, I deliver messages. I just read these messages from my computer in English every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and God's angels make them available to every human being on earth in his or her own language. Test it for yourself. Just tune your ear to hear, and you will hear the 45 to 60-minute long messages. Now, I deliver these messages proving that Christmas and Easter are pagan festivals which God hates and originated in direct rebellion against the true God of the Bible. But Americans in Britain still continue to keep these holidays with gusto, with all pagan trappings and traditions, and are nowhere near observing God's commanded Sabbaths and annual holy days mentioned in Leviticus 23, which picture God's plan of salvation for all of mankind. I rehearse these holy days each year and explain their great significance. As God has already prophesied, our warning is not going to change our people. They have this attitude because they say in their hearts that God has forsaken the earth, as stated in Ezekiel 9 verses 9 to 10. Then said he unto me, This iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is exceeding great, and the land is full of blood, and the city full of perverseness. For they say, The Lord has forsaken the earth, and the Lord sees not. And as for me also, mine eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity, but I will recompense their way upon their head. Now, many think God has forsaken the earth and is unconcerned about human affairs. Therefore they can do anything without any consequences from God. And many have serious doubts if God even exists. Now God delivered prophecies to Ezekiel concerning the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Most of these prophecies describe their sins and the consequences that will follow, which is defeat and war, removal from their lands, and national slavery. When God was delivering his prophecies to Ezekiel, the northern kingdom, the house of Israel, had already been defeated by the Assyrians more than 130 years previously, taken captive as slaves and removed from their lands. Therefore, Ezekiel's prophecies concerning Israel's sins, defeat and war as a result, removal from their lands and being scattered around the world as slaves, apply to modern descendants of the house of Israel, that is, America and British Commonwealth nations. Prophecies very often duel with a former fulfillment in the times of ancient Israel and Judah and an end-time fulfillment in our time. When God was giving prophecies concerning the house of Judah or the Jews, they were in the process of being completely conquered by the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar. God was working with 3 prophets at that time. Jeremiah, who prophesied for 40 years, was working in Judah and Jerusalem. Ezekiel, who was taken captive in 597 BCE, was prophesying in Babylon, while Daniel, taken captive in 605 BCE, was serving the king of Babylon, and God was also revealing prophecies to him. Thus, some of the prophecies concerning Judah being revealed to Ezekiel and Jeremiah were fulfilled by the ancient house of Judah or the Jews. But there will also be a modern day fulfillment for Judah, which is the Jewish state of Israel. Now God has prophesied through Hosea the prophet in Hosea 5 verses 5 to 7 that Israel and Judah will fall together, which state, And the pride of Israel does testify to his face. Therefore shall Israel and Ephraim fall in their iniquity, Judah also shall fall with them. They shall go with their flocks and with their herds to seek the Lord, but they shall not find him, for he has withdrawn himself from them. They have dealt treacherously against the Lord, for they have begotten strange children, meaning that they do not know the true God. Now shall a month devour them with their portions, meaning they will be conquered together in a 30-day war. Now ancient Israel and Judah did not fall together. House of Israel fell 137 years before the fall of the house of Judah. Judah and Israel falling together is proof that prophecies about America, Britain and Judah or the state of Israel falling together and going into national captivity are for our times. A very important question to ask is, how do we know if people know their God? The answer is that they know Him to be Almighty, that He is involved in their daily lives and fear Him, so that they diligently study what He wants them to do in their lives and do it by obeying all His commands. If a person or an individual disobeys their God's commandments, then they know for certain that they will be punished by their God, or they disobey because they don't truly know that their God is the Almighty God. So how do America, British Commonwealth nations and the state of Israel stand in this regard? America and Britain profess to be Christian nations, and the Jews think they are a religious people. 75% of Americans identify themselves as Christian. But what is the key characteristic of a Christian who practices religion seriously? It is commanded weekly church attendance, not once or twice a month or at religious holidays only. From the Pew Research Center's Religious Landscape Study, 46.6% of Americans attend weekly church services. 22.9% belong to no religion. These figures were based on a survey of 35,000 Americans. In Britain, the British Social Attitude Survey taken in 2017 finds that 53% of Britons are non-religious, 15% are Anglicans, 9% Catholics, 17% other Christians, and 6% belong to other religions. Thus, only 41% of Britons classify themselves as Christian, and only 5% of the adult population attends church. Those attending the weekly commanded church attendance is even lower. In Israel, Pew Research data shows 81% of Israelis are Jews, 40% of them are secular, 23% are traditional, meaning middle of the ground, 10% are religious, and 8% ultra-Orthodox. From the data, I have calculated that only about 21% of Jews in Israel attend Sabbath services weekly. Thus, the Jews in Israel are not a very religious lot, but even considering the fact whether they are following the true religion or not. The Jews are not following the true religion because they don't even recognize their God. They don't acknowledge Jesus Christ as the Messiah and that He was the God of the Old Testament, so they do not know their true God. Even America and British Commonwealth nations don't know the true God and Jesus Christ, as you will see, because a false god, Nimrod, is worshipped on Sunday, that is day of sun worship, and in Christmas, Easter, and other Christian holidays. God prophesied about the religiosity of a people in 2 Corinthians 3 verses 1 to 9. This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. They seem to be religious, but in reality are not, because they disobey God's commandments. Now, daily news show us that America and Britain are broken countries. In this age of transgenderism, we no longer define male or female correctly. Boys can claim to be girls and girls can claim to be boys. Confusion reigns in the minds, though biologically there is no ambiguity about a person being a male or female. It has put women's sports to turmoil. Schools are experiencing difficulties framing and implementing bathroom policies. Homosexuality and deviant sex are paraded with pride in our streets, and those who speak out against such evils are shunned by the cancel culture activists, many having their livelihood seriously impacted. They lose their jobs. Thus, critics are being economically and socially bludgeoned into silence. This kind of activism is effective because a majority of our youth have bought into these trends because of a perverse education in our schools and colleges that promote such ideas. In schools, if a particular group is not doing well academically, testing is termed radical, racist, and such groups want to do away with testing altogether. Society is sundered along racial lines. We are not a united country. Open borders are changing the demographics of the country, and there is no end in sight. Number of illegal immigrant encounters in this fiscal year is on pace to exceed 2 million. Number of legal migrants varies from 700,000 to 1.2 million each year. With these trends, white Americans will lose their country in a few decades. In the meantime, unrest and social turmoil are increasing in the country as different races being constantly bolstered in numbers by immigrants assert themselves. Celebrities are being victimized and shamed in the cancel culture, and minorities are asserting their woke agenda. Crime pays big time in the United States. If police shoot criminals dead or injure them, they or their families are awarded millions of dollars in compensation so that they can live prosperously and no longer have to work or commit crimes to support themselves for the rest of their lives. Justice is turned upside down. When minority, particularly black criminals, are killed by police, their populations demand justice, and in some cases, policemen are even imprisoned. Our national debt is spiraling upward and out of control. It stands at 130.7 trillion with the debt to GDP ratio of 123.8%, up from 56.7% in 2000. A 2013 study for the World Bank found that if the debt to GDP ratio exceeds 77% for an extended period, it slows economic growth. The US is definitely in the serious danger zone, and the economy is being sustained by printing money. Other nations are beginning to take action by finding alternatives to the US dollar to denominate the international trade and finance transactions. They may stop accepting the dollar for their exports, which means we may no longer be able to buy as much cheap imported products as we want. Then climate change is affecting the US as much as any other country. Wildfires are burning up forests and properties in towns and cities. More areas are experiencing floods with loss of life and property, whereas other areas are drying up because of prolonged droughts. Western United States has been in a prolonged mega drought for the past 23 years. Agriculture is being seriously affected, and even water for human consumption is being rationed. All these are results of our disobedience to God's laws, because God controls the weather. After building the temple in Jerusalem, Solomon prayed to God, acknowledging this in 1 Kings chapter 8 verses 35 to 36, which state, "When heaven is shut up and there is no rain because they have sinned against you, if they pray towards this place and confess your name and turn from their sin when you afflict them, then hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your servants and of your people Israel, that you teach them the good way wherein they should walk, and give rain upon your land, which you have given to his people as an inheritance." Our nations refuse to obey God, indicating that they don't fear him, which means they don't know him. They don't want anyone to tell them what to do because they have the freedom to do whatever they want to do. Now, I have written a detailed ebook titled Modern Romans, a warning for America, Britain, and Israel, available free on my religion website. www.churchofgodmessage.com. In this book, I have provided details with extensive statistics on how America, British Commonwealth nations, and the State of Israel are sinning by breaking almost all of God's commandments. They also sincerely want God's protection through the catastrophes that will soon engulf the world. They should carefully read this ebook and change their ways to stop violating God's laws and begin to diligently seek and worship God. In the Ten Commandments, God included two test commandments for Israel to demonstrate their obedience to Him. These are stated in the very beginning of Leviticus 23:6, the chapter that mentions the blessing Israel would experience for obedience to God's laws and curses for disobedience. These are Leviticus 26 verses 1 to 2. You shall not make idols for yourself, neither a carved image nor a sacred pillar shall you set up for themselves, shall you rear up for themselves, nor shall you set up an engraved tool stone in your hand to bow down to it, for I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. In the first test commandment, Israel was told not to make any idols or images of God, including of Jesus Mary, to aid them in their worship. The second test commandment was to keep the sacred Sabbath day from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset holy. Go to any church in the United States and Britain and you will see crosses, statues, and images of Jesus and Mary in stained glass windows or nativity scenes. People kneel in front of them while praying, and no mainstream Christian church worships on the Sabbath day. They all worship on the day of sun worship, Sunday. Now God told ancient Israel in Exodus 31 verses 12 to 17, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily, verily, my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord that sanctifies you. Now, sanctify means to set apart as holy or be identified as God's people. That means those who won't keep the Sabbath are not set apart as God's holy people. Sabbath is a sign that identifies God's own people. The Americans and Britons refuse to keep God's two test commandments. Because of that, God does not consider them as his own people. Some Jews keep the Sabbath, but only a minority attend synagogue on the Sabbath. Thus, a majority of Jews also don't keep the Sabbath day. Even those who do don't acknowledge Jesus as the Messiah. They are not worshipping the true God during Sabbath worship services in their synagogues. You can check for yourself that the Catholic Church, in its vital version of the Ten Commandments, has changed only these two test commandments, removing the second commandment about not making idols or images entirely, because this false church is steeped in idols and worshipping relics. It has changed the fourth commandment to keep the Sabbath holy, to keep the Lord's Day, meaning Sunday, the ancient pagan day of sun worship, to keep the Lord's Sabbath day holy, but God has not given any human or angel or church organization the authority to change His commandments. Have you wondered why America and British Commonwealth nations do not recognize themselves as Israelites? They believe they are Gentiles, whereas the Jews are recognized as Israelites. God said in Exodus 31 verses 6 to 17, Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout the generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. The Sabbaths were a sign that identified Israel as God's people. The Jews still keep the Sabbath, though in name only, but they are still recognized as God's people. Because America and Britain do not keep the Sabbath holy, they lost the only sign that identifies them as God's people. That's why they were numbered among the lost 10 tribes. That is how important the Sabbath is in identifying God's true church and His people. In my ebook, I have also documented how America, Britain, and the Jews violate the other 10 commandments of the eight, and violate 8 commandments of the other 10. In addition to violating all the 10 commandments, America, Britain, and Israel violate God's other commandments. First, not keeping God's commanded annual holy days. Besides keeping the Sabbath day, God commanded Israel to keep His 7 annual feasts, which are all mentioned in Leviticus 23. These are the Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, Pentecost, or Feast of First Fruits, Feast of Trumpets, or Rosh Hashanah as the Jews call it, Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur as the Jews call it, the Feast of Tabernacles, and the Last Great Day. Each of these feasts picture a great milestone in God's plan of salvation for all mankind. Americans and Britons don't keep any of them. The Jews keep some of them, but without an understanding of their true significance. How can one keep the Passover correctly without understanding that Jesus Christ was the true Passover sacrifice for the sins of all mankind? Even when God's church was explained their true meaning, the Jews were not willing to change their address, not willing to change their traditions. Now, Christianity's pagan holidays. Instead of keeping God's 7 annual feasts, mainstream Christianity keeps its own holidays such as Christmas and Easter, which have pagan origins more than 2,000 years before the birth and sacrifice of Jesus Christ. These holidays are associated with the worship of Baal, Moloch, Tammuz, which are other names for Nimrod in Genesis 10 verses 8 to 9, and Astarte, name for Nimrod's mother Semiramis, also known as the Queen of Heaven by the pagans. Nobody is in doubt that demons are worshipped at Halloween. The worship practices of these holidays are condemned in the Bible. Jesus Christ is not worshipped in these pagan holidays, but pagan gods such as the sun god or Nimrod, deified as Baal, etc. Thus, God the Father and Jesus Christ are not worshipped in Sunday services and annual holidays such as Christmas and Easter. Tree worship is condemned in Jeremiah 10 verses 1 to 6. Worship of the Queen of Heaven with cakes or hot cross buns, as in Easter, is condemned in Jeremiah 7:16 to 20. Worship of the sun in sunrise Easter services practices is mentioned in Ezekiel 8 verses 13 to 18, which in part states, "And he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs towards the temple of the Lord, and their faces towards the east, and they worshipped the sun toward the east." Keeping of holidays is condemned in the Bible through Isaiah in Isaiah 1 verses 14 to 20. "Your new moon feasts and your appointed feasts I hate with all my being. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands in prayer, I hide my face from you. Even when you offer many prayers, I am not listening. If you are willing and obedient, you will eat the good things of the land. But if you resist and rebel, you will be devoured by the sword," meaning defeat in war and national slavery. For 1/4 of the Lord has spoken. God also says through Hosea 2 verse 11, "I will also cause all her," meaning Israel's, "mirth to cease, her feast days, her new moons, her new Sabbaths," meaning for Sunday worship services and festivals, etc., and not God's Sabbaths, and 7 annual holy days, and all her solemn feasts, Christmas, Easter, and others. God is angry with the nations for failing to keep his annual feasts and helping their own traditions and their holidays. Now, almost universally, Americans and Britons violate God's dietary law. God condemns eating swine's flesh and other unclean meats. Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14 mention the clean and unclean beasts, but our people eat swine's flesh, rabbits, shellfish such as lobster, shrimp, and other unclean fish, and unclean birds in abundance. God warned in Deuteronomy 14:3, "You shall not eat any abominable thing. Besides these meats not being good for our health, the main reason God wants us to not eat unclean meats because it is a matter of holiness. God defines who is holy, and he says, if ye eat flesh of abominable things, you are to comply. If they eat the flesh of abominable things, you are unholy. Now the Bible describes the flesh of unclean animals as an abomination in Leviticus 11:10 to 13, 20, 23, and 41 to 42, and detestable in Deuteronomy 14 verse 3. God says in Leviticus 11:43 to 44, "You shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping thing that creeps, until you have made yourself unclean after them, that you should be defiled thereby. For I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy." To be holy means to be set apart by God. Thus the specific purpose found given for avoiding unclean meats is holiness. In God's time, refraining from eating unclean meats identifies people that he has set apart through a relationship with him as holy. Now, because of these violations, God's prophecies in Isaiah 65 verses 2 to 12 and 3a, "People that provokes me to anger continually to my face, which eat swine's flesh and broth of abominable things in their vessels. These are a smoke to my nose, a fire that burns all day. For behold, it is written before response, behold, it is written, where me I will be kept silent, and will recompense, even recompense into their bosom. You are they that forsake the Lord, that forget my holy mountain. Therefore will I number you to the sword, and you shall all bow down to the slaughter. Because when I called, you did not answer. When I spoke, meaning of and warning issued by his true church in my sermons, and you did not hear, but did evil before my eyes, and his choice, and choose that wherein I delighted not." Number 4, God also condemns drinking and music. In ordinary stress on drinking and music, and total disregard of how God is working on earth, he is not at all in our thoughts. God says through Isaiah 5 verses 11 to 13, "Woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink, that continue until midnight, till wine inflame them. And the harp and the viol and the tabret and the pipe and wine are in their feasts, but they regard not the operation of his hands. Therefore my people are gone into captivity, because they have no knowledge, and their horrible men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. Therefore hell has enlarged herself, and opened her mouth without measure, and their joy and their multitude and them and them that are mighty to drink wine, and men of strength to mingle strong drink. God is very specific about our people's attitude in our time when will disasters stare us in the face, as provided in Isaiah 22 verses 12 to 14. And in that day, this phrase always refers to the end time. Did the Lord God of hosts call to weeping and to mourning and to baldness and to girding with sackcloth, almost a call, remaining a call to repentance, as God's church has been doing for the past 100 years. And behold, joy and gladness, saving tens and killing sheep, eating flesh, drinking wine. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we shall die. And it was revealed in mine ears by the Lord of hosts, surely this iniquity shall not be purged, that you from you till you die, says the Lord God of hosts. Then fifth category is tattoos and other marks on the body. Here are two more clear commands in biblical one, Leviticus 19:27 to 28. You shall not round the corners of your beards, neither shall you mar the corners of your beard. You shall not make any changes in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. I am the Lord. It seems if there is a law in the Bible prohibiting something, Americans and Britons would deliberately, in outright rebellion to spite God, go ahead and do it proudly. Witness the tattoos printed on their bodies by celebrities and much of the population, and fancy haircuts and beards. Such a defiance and rebellion against God's law is in violation of a covenant made at the time of Moses, will automatically bring the persecuted penalties, defeat and war and national slavery. Our ancestors made a covenant with God and the Bible, God of the Bible, binding their descendants also to the covenant forever. After God, through Moses and Aaron, brought their ancestors out of Egypt in the Exodus, inflicting the Egyptians with plagues and killing their firstborn, their situation in the wilderness was bleak. They had no chance of survival in an unforgiving environment with little food or water. They had no homeland to go to, and no nation around would accept them as residents. If they went back to Egypt, the Egyptians would enslave them again and deal with them brutally and vengefully. After they all had lost their firstborn and their land had been devastated due to the plagues. The Israelites had seen God's almighty powers translated. God even had the Egyptians reward them with riches, gold and silver for wages for all the people of all the years of slavery when they went out of Egypt. Their God had promised them the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, Jebusites, Perizzites, and Girgashites, as stated in Exodus 33 verses 1 to 3 and Deuteronomy 7. They had seen the waters of the Red Sea parted and Pharaoh and his army drowned. After having seen God's power demonstrated, they believed he could keep that promise as well. Exodus 14:31 says, and Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and feared the Lord and his servant Moses. Then God gave them water to drink in the wilderness and manna to eat. So they saw that their God was able to provide food and water miraculously even for 3 million people. When the Amalekites attacked, God gave the Israelites victory over them so that they destroyed the attacking Amalekites. God had told them that he was bringing the Israelites out of Egypt because of their covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob Now, under these circumstances, even having seen God's almighty powers demonstrated when Israelites found themselves in a bleak desert environment, God proposed an agreement or covenant with them based on the covenant he had made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Exodus 19 verses 3 to 8 records the proposal. And Moses went up unto God, and he called, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, children, out of the mountain, saying, Thus shall you say to the house of Israel, and tell the children of Israel, You have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all the people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak unto the children of Israel. And Moses came and called for the elders and of the people, and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, All that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. This is because before the Lord was giving that going to spark the Ten Commandments to the people. The people agreed to obey the Ten Commandments, which could be spoken by the Lord. After the Ten Commandments were forsaken by God, the people's reaction is given text. Exodus 18 to 20 state, And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. And they said unto Moses, You speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said unto the people, Fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your eyes, that you sin not. The people were afraid when they heard the loud thunder and lightnings and the loud trumpet and said, instead of God speaking to them again, they'd rather hear Moses about what God commands them and will do to them. Now after that God honored their request and spoke to the people only through Moses and the prophets after Moses, and then never directly to the movie. Even Moses was fearful of the sight, as Hebrews states, and so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. Now after speaking the Ten Commandments, God delivered his judgment, which are recorded in the next 3 chapters. Then Moses records what happens. Exodus 24 verses 3 to 7. And Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice and said, All the words which the Lord has said will we do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and rose up early in the morning and built an altar under the hill, and 12 pillars, according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the house of Israel, which burnt peace offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen unto the Lord. And Moses took him of the blood, and Moses took half of the blood and put it on in basins, and half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Thus the covenant was ratified with blood. And he looked, and he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people, and they said, All that the Lord has said we will do, and be obedient. Thus it is recorded 3 times that the ancient Israelites agreed to obey God's commandments and judgments and all that he would tell Moses. Moses was then 40 years and 40 nights with the God of Israel, who gave him additional statutes and judgments, which Moses wrote down in the first 5 books of the Bible. That is the agreement our ancestors made with God, and that covenant is still binding on us, their descendants. Now Ezekiel 31:13 says, Speak also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily or truly my Sabbaths you shall keep. For it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. The phrase throughout your generations is almost an interference to many countries' laws, indicating that the covenant is binding on all generations of the Israelites of Israel. Now, as part of the covenant or agreement, God told Moses the blessing that would follow for obedience to his laws and guesses for disobedience. These were recorded in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. Leviticus 26 states, If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do harm, then I will give you rain in due season, and the land shall yield her increase. And the trees of the field shall yield their fruit, and your threshing shall reach unto the vintage and the vintage shall reach unto the sowing time. And you shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in your land safely. Now, continuing, and you shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. Many more blessings are also stated. These are incredible blessings of material prosperity and protection from enemies during warfare. God then describes curses for disobedience, beginning in verse 14. But if you will not hearken unto me, and will not do all these commandments, and if you shall despise my statutes, or if your soul abhor my judgments, so that you will not do all my commandments, but that you break my covenant, I also will do this unto you. I will even appoint over you terror, consumption, and the burning ague, that shall consume the eyes and cause sorrow of heart. And you shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. And I will set my face against you, and you shall be slain before your enemies. They that hate you shall reign over you, and you shall flee when none pursues you. Moses then recorded more curses. God says that if our people will not do all his commandments, then he'll bring on us terrorism, terrible plagues or diseases, and they that hate us will reign over us. If we continue to break any of his commandments, as James 2:10 says, for whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. So if we break any of his commandments, we will bring more of God's curses on us. Leviticus 23:26 continues, beginning in verse 23. And if you will not be reformed by me by these things, but will walk contrary unto me, then will I also walk contrary unto you, and will punish you 7 times for your sins. And I will bring a sword upon you, that shall avenge the quarrel of my covenant. And I will destroy your high places, and cut down your images, and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. And I will make your cities waste, and bring your sanctuaries into desolation. And I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors. And I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at it. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. Clearly, for violations of his laws, God promises Americans, Britons, and Jews in the state of Israel the sword and defeat in war, removal from our lands, and being sold and scattered around the world in national slavery while our enemies occupy our land. God has even prophesied the exact sequence of end time events in the book of Revelation. My ebook titled World and Bible Prophecy describes the sequence in detail. Please read the free ebook on my website www.churchofgodmessage.com. Clearly, because we continue to violate almost all of God's laws with impunity, we demonstrate that we don't know a God whom a minority, not a majority, but a minority of us profess to worship. We do not fear Him. That's why we do not put forth the effort to diligently learn His ways and laws and obey them. But God has prophesied that our people will get to know Him. In His prophecies, again, as I stated, God, through Ezekiel the prophet, recorded the phrase, "Then shall they," meaning Israel and Judah, or Americans, Britons, and the Jews, "then shall they know that I am the Lord," more than 60 times. In each of these cases, Ezekiel describes how God will punish us for the sword for violating His laws, many being slaughtered, followed by national slavery for the remnant. When our people are in great distress and their lives hang by a thread, then they will turn to the Lord in prayer. He will then intervene and rescue us from national slavery after 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation, spoken of by Jesus in Matthew 24 verses 21 to 22. That is how our people will get to know the Lord, as He has prophesied through Ezekiel and the other prophets. I will discuss those prophecies in part 2 video. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, to view and get information on the latest videos. Some people do not have the time to go through the full length of videos. They find it more convenient to read the text of the video. Unfortunately, YouTube does not provide the capability to make the text of my videos available on YouTube, but fortunately Facebook does provide that capability. So I make the text of my videos available on my Facebook channel, which you can easily copy.